Don't touch my things, Yuna snapped, stepping back like the elderly woman's fingers were something contagious. What is wrong with you? The elderly woman flinched. Her hand dropped slowly back to her side. She was soaking wet, mud streaked from her knees down, silver hair plastered flat against her face. Her eyes moved in slow, frightened circles, searching the crowd the way a child searches for a familiar face in an unfamiliar place. I'm not asking for money, she said softly. I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Please, I just need... Go to a shelter. Yuna glanced at the crowd gathering around them, making sure they were watching. Stop causing a scene in front of my shoot. I can't remember, the elderly woman whispered. Her eyes filled slowly. I can't remember where my home is. Yuna's expression curdled into something uglier. You can't remember? Or you're just looking for sympathy so someone gives you money? She gestured at the mud-smeared clothes with open disgust. You're filthy. You're ruining the entire block. The elderly woman said nothing. She stood in the rain, lips pressed together like she was trying very hard not to fall apart in front of strangers. One thin hand reached out again. Not grabbing, not demanding, just reaching. The way people reach when they are frightened and need something solid to hold on to. Yuna stepped back from it like it burned. Near the back of the crowd, someone raised their phone and quietly pressed record. That was when Cassie stepped forward. Hey! Calm, flat, certain. Back off. Yuna turned and looked her up and down. This has nothing to do with you. This woman is in medical distress. She's confused, she's hypothermic, and she needs help. Not this. Yuna smiled, which was somehow worse than the yelling. She's a filthy homeless woman who wandered into my video shoot. You're a foreigner sticking your nose into something you don't understand. I understand enough. Cassie moved so her body was between them. Walk away. The smile tightened. Do you even know who she is? Cassie looked at her evenly. No, but neither do you. For a moment, nobody moved. The rain filled the silence between them. Then Yuna smoothed her coat, lifted her bags, and walked without another word to a waiting black car. The door closed. The car pulled away. Cassie turned. The elderly woman was standing exactly where she'd been, shaking from somewhere deep inside. Her eyes, when they found Cassie's, were wide and wet and full of something that looked painfully close to relief. And if this is your first time here, welcome. If you enjoy stories about unexpected kindness, hidden secrets, and love finding its way through the most unlikely circumstances, consider subscribing and joining this little family. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Cassie knelt right there on the wet pavement, not caring about her scrubs or the rain or the people still watching. She kept her voice low and steady, the voice she used with frightened patience, the ones who came in not knowing what was wrong with them and terrified to find out. Can you tell me your name? The woman opened her mouth. A name started to form and then dissolved, her brow furrowed with the effort of chasing it. I know my name. I know it. She pressed her fingers against her temple. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. Cassie reached out and gently touched her forearm. Not grabbing, just contact, just presence. Do you know where your family is? Is there anyone I can call? The woman's eyes filled again. She patted her coat pockets with trembling hands, both empty. Whatever she'd been carrying was long gone, lost somewhere in the blocks she'd wandered. I had a number, she said. I wrote it down somewhere. I had it. Her hands dropped. I'm sorry. I can't. It's okay. Cassie kept her voice steady. You don't have to remember right now. I'm a nurse. You're safe with me. Do you understand? You are safe. For one brief second, something changed in the elderly woman's frightened expression. Her eyes drifted toward the direction Yuna's car had disappeared, and her lips moved. I don't want to go back. Cassie frowned. Go back where? But the woman's expression suddenly emptied again. I don't remember. Cassie studied her quietly. The words left her with an uneasy feeling she couldn't explain. She had no idea the woman standing in front of her was connected to a family powerful enough to turn an entire city upside down looking for her. The nearest clinic was dark, a handwritten sign on the door about flooding in the back office. 2 blocks down, she could hear emergency vehicles, the precinct overwhelmed with a major accident that had just come in. Cassie made a decision. She took the woman home. At her apartment, she wrapped her in blankets, made hot tea, laid out dry clothes. The woman sat quietly, both hands around the mug, eyes moving slowly around the small, honest space. Medical textbooks beside novels. A framed photo of Cassie with an older woman who had the same eyes. A plant on the windowsill that was thriving against all odds. After a while, the woman's breathing steadied. The shaking slowed. "What's your name?" she asked. "Cassandra," Cassie said. "But you can call me Cassie." The woman repeated it softly, like she was testing the weight of it, like it meant something she couldn't quite place. A few minutes passed. The rain tapped against the window. "What's your name?" the woman asked again. Cassie didn't hesitate, didn't sigh. "Cassie," she said, with the exact same warmth as the first time. The woman nodded slowly. Then she tilted her head and studied Cassie's face with an expression that shifted into something searching and distant. "You remind me of someone," she said. "Someone who was very good to me, a long time ago." She pressed one hand lightly over her heart. "I feel it here. I don't remember the picture, but I feel it here." Cassie leaned forward. "Who?" The moment dissolved. The searching look faded like a candle going out. The woman blinked. "I can't. It was just there. I'm sorry." "It's all right," Cassie said, and she meant it. She stepped into the hallway and called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring the way she always did, as if she'd been waiting. "Mama, I found a woman on the street this evening. Elderly, confused, no ID. I think she has dementia. I've got her at my place warming up, but I'm taking her to the station as soon as she's stable. Is she all right?" "She will be. She just needs someone to claim her." A brief pause. "You did right, baby. Get her there safe. And Cassie, you be careful." "Always am." She didn't notice, couldn't notice, the way her mother's voice had tightened slightly on the other end, the way something had moved across her face in that quiet apartment miles away. A shadow, a memory, something old trying to surface. Neither of them said anything about it. Not that night. On the other side of Seoul, Kang Tae-yul received a message that his entire organization existed to prevent. Madame Kang is missing. He had left one instruction that morning. Standing in the doorway, looking directly at Yuna. Don't leave her alone for a single second. Yuna had smiled and said, of course, naturally, don't worry. She said it the way she said most things, effortlessly, meaning absolutely nothing by it. What actually happened was simpler and uglier. Madame Kang had grown repetitive at the cafe, circling through the same questions the way she did on difficult afternoons. Yuna had grown bored, then irritated, then silently furious in the way of someone who resents being inconvenienced by a person they agreed to care for. She told herself the woman wouldn't move, that she would sit exactly where she'd been left and wait. She was wrong. By the time Yuna returned from her social media excursion, the table was empty. A server said the old woman had walked out 40 minutes ago, and he had assumed she was meeting someone outside. What followed was not love. It was terror. The specific terror of someone whose carefully constructed position was about to collapse. Yuna went into the rain looking, but she was looking for herself, not for Madame Kang. 3 blocks east of the cafe, she spotted a soaked, mud-streaked woman causing a scene on the sidewalk. Disheveled, disoriented. She did not see Madame Kang. She saw an obstacle. The expensive clothes beneath the grime didn't register. The silver hair didn't register. The reaching hands registered only as something to be disgusted by. She screamed at her, called her filthy, and walked away. Madame Kang stood in the rain and watched the back of her disappear. Then a stranger with gentle hands knelt down in front of her and said, "You are safe with me." Back at the estate, Yuna smoothed her coat, fixed her expression, and told Tae-yul she had only stepped away 5 minutes. A bathroom break. She thought she was still at the table. Her voice was a perfectly calibrated blend of guilt and helplessness, the performance of someone who had made an innocent mistake rather than someone who had abandoned an elderly woman with dementia and then failed to recognize her standing directly in her path. Taeyul looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he walked out of the room and began dismantling the city. His entire network went on immediate alert. CCTV feeds pulled from dozens of blocks. Men fanned out on foot. 3 police precincts activated. He moved through all of it like something cold and mechanical, because the alternative, feeling the full weight of what her absence meant, wasn't something he could afford yet. His grandmother had raised him. His biological mother died when he was too young to hold permanent memories of her. Everything real and sustained and formative had come from one woman, and she had made herself into a mother through sheer force of love, during years that had been neither safe nor simple. She was his anchor. She was the reason there was still something recognizably human underneath everything the years had carved away. The thought of her alone and frightened somewhere in this enormous city was not something he would let himself hold directly, so he kept moving. Then his phone rang. A precinct captain. A nurse had brought in an elderly woman. Healthy, stable, calm. Taeyul was moving before the call ended. He came through the precinct doors ahead of his own reputation. The officer at the front desk straightened involuntarily. "Madame Kang," was all he said. The duty officer looked up with the expression of someone reporting something mildly extraordinary. "She was brought in about an hour ago, sir. A nurse found her on the street, took her home to warm her up, then came directly here. Professional assessment, clear handover documentation. Your grandmother was calm when she arrived." He paused. The nurse had already left when we confirmed the identity. She said she had an evening shift and patients waiting. Taeyul stared at him. She left, signed the documentation and went straight back to work. Didn't leave a personal number, didn't ask for anything. He stood with that for a moment. In his world, nobody did anything for the Kang family without calculating what they would receive in return. Power, money, access, protection, something was always being angled for. Always. The idea of someone finding his grandmother in the rain, taking her home, caring for her, and then simply leaving to go back to work because she had patients who needed her, he didn't have a frame for it immediately. He looked down at the intake form. The handwriting was neat and unhurried. Cassie Morgan, RN. He folded that name somewhere careful inside himself. Then he went to find his grandmother. She was in a small room at the back, both hands around a paper cup of tea, a blanket over her lap. She looked smaller than he remembered. She often looked smaller after a hard day. He sat across from her and leaned forward. She looked at him with eyes that were far away. "Who are you?" He breathed through it, the way he always breathed through it. Then her eyes traveled slowly across his face. Her hand came up and rested against his cheek, cool and papery and certain. "Taeyul," she said. "My boy." He closed his eyes. Just for a second, he did not cry, but it was a near thing. Cassie was 3 hours into her evening shift when her colleague Jisoo appeared at her elbow. "The woman this evening, did she find her family?" Cassie smiled without looking up from her chart. "She did. What was the family name? In case there's follow-up paperwork." "Kang," Cassie said, and moved on to the next patient. She didn't see Jisoo's expression, and she couldn't see, what happened miles away when she mentioned it casually to her mother later that night. The woman's family came for her. Family name was Kang. The silence on the other end lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. The particular quality of silence that falls when something unexpected walks through a door you thought was permanently closed. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here." Her mother's voice was perfectly even. "That's good, baby. I'm glad she's safe. You went quiet. Just an old memory." "It's nothing. Tell me about your shift." But after they hung up, her mother sat for a long time in her kitchen, with the lights low, hands folded on the table, looking at nothing, doing arithmetic that kept coming out to the same impossible answer. She didn't call Cassie back, not that night. Taeyul stood outside the hospital 4 days later and waited. When Cassie came out at the end of her shift, she saw him and stopped. She read him the way she read all strangers, quickly, accurately. "Cassie Morgan?" he said. "Depends on who's asking." "Kang Taeyul, you brought my grandmother to the precinct." Something shifted in her expression, not intimidation, just recalibration. "She's all right?" Because of you. He named a figure, the kind that makes most conversations rearrange themselves around it. Cassie looked at him steadily. No. He blinked. Just slightly. No. I didn't help your grandmother for a reward, Mr. Kang. I helped her because she was a human being in trouble. Anyone should have done the same. Most people didn't. That's not my problem to solve by taking your money. A pause. Is she really all right? He studied her for a moment. Nobody asked him that. They asked about the family, the situation, the implications. Nobody just asked if she was all right. She has dementia, he said. Most days she's somewhere between herself and somewhere else. But yesterday she remembered my name. He stopped. Started again differently. She raised me after my mother died. She's the only mother I've known. For the first time, Cassie looked at him differently, not as the intimidating man standing in front of her, not as the powerful grandson who could probably make half of Seoul answer his phone. Just as a man who had been terrified of losing the person who raised him. My mother raised me alone, Cassie said quietly, so I know what it means when one person becomes your whole world. Taeyul's expression changed. Cassie looked away, suddenly aware that she had said more than she intended. My father died when I was young, she added. My mother never let me feel like I was missing anything. But sometimes, she paused, sometimes I wonder if that's why I became a nurse. Maybe I learned early that people can disappear from your life without warning. Taeyul said nothing, but something in his face softened. Neither of them knew it yet, but the two people sitting there were connected by the same wound. Both had grown up knowing what it felt like to lose someone, and both had spent their lives trying, in different ways, to make sure nobody else had to experience that pain alone. Cassie was quiet. I could see it, she said. How much she loves whoever she loves. It was still there, even when everything else was hard to reach. Something moved in his chest, small and unexpected. Cassie, she said. Just Cassie. Taeyul pulled the CCTV footage himself, 3 days later. He watched Yuna appear on screen, 2 blocks from where Madame Kang was standing, watched her approach the crowd, watched her come within feet of an elderly woman in muddy clothes, his grandmother, and look directly at her face, and not see her. He watched it 3 more times. On the second viewing, he noticed the bystander recording. On the third, he traced the exact moment Yuna's eyes moved across Madame Kang's face, passed over her like she was pavement, and something cold and final settled into place inside him. She had been close enough to touch her. She had failed to recognize her because she had never actually looked at Madame Kang the way you look at someone who matters to you. Not once in all the months of performed devotion. He called Yuna into the main sitting room that evening, set the tablet on the coffee table, pressed play without explaining what it was. Yuna's voice came out of the speakers, sharp, contemptuous, ugly in a way her followers had never heard. She found the right expression, the remorseful one. She found it 2 seconds too late. I can explain. You were searching for her, Taeyul said. Not accusing, stating. You spent hours in the rain looking for her. She was standing directly in front of you, and you called her filthy and walked away. I didn't recognize her. She was covered in mud. I was panicking. From the chair by the window, Madame Kang stirred. She had been half asleep, but some frequency in Yuna's voice cut through, the pitch of it, or perhaps just the emotional residue of a memory that didn't need language to survive. She left me in the cold, Madame Kang said, clearly, calmly, like describing weather, not looking at anyone, just looking out the window. No one spoke. Taeyul stood up. He said very few words, and every one of them was final, the way the closing of a very heavy door is final. Yuna was removed from the estate that evening. His investigators delivered their report the following morning. The wealthy, cultured family she had described at dinner parties. The parents who had met Taeyul 3 months into their relationship. Warm, effortlessly elegant, exactly the right kind of people. All hired actors. Her entire background was meticulous fiction, assembled over years, targeted at men whose fortunes made the performance worth the investment. Her sponsorships began collapsing within 48 hours. Brand partners quietly ended their contracts. She still had her phone. She still had her remaining followers. She still had her rage. She found the original bystander video, rearranged it, stripped the context, and posted it with a carefully written caption describing a foreign nurse pursuing a confused elderly woman to extort a wealthy family. The post moved fast. By the time Cassie arrived for her morning shift 2 days later, there was a notice requesting her presence in the director's office at the end of her day. Her colleagues couldn't quite meet her eyes in the corridor. 3 nurses looked at her just slightly too long as she walked past. She pulled up the post during her lunch break, read it completely, set her phone face down on the break room table, and sat very still for a moment, looking at the wall. She had knelt in the rain for a frightened woman. She had taken her home, warmed her up, sat with her patiently through every repeated question, brought her safely to the authorities, and gone straight back to work. And someone had taken that and made it into something ugly, made her into something ugly. She sat with that for 60 seconds. Then she stood up and went back to her patients. If this story is hitting you right now, like it right now, and drop a comment, because this is the moment everything gets harder before it gets better. Taeyul had the full original CTV footage, clear, time-stamped, irrefutable, released through 3 verified media channels before Cassie finished her shift. By evening, Yuna's version had been publicly dismantled. The narrative inverted completely. Cassie's name moved through the internet a second time, attached to very different words. He went to her apartment anyway, because destroying a smear campaign online and the experience of having it happen to you were 2 entirely different things. She answered the door in a worn sweatshirt, holding coffee, tired but not defeated. He noticed the distinction. "It was a consequence of my world," he said. "I'm sorry for it. It wasn't your fault." "No, but I'm still sorry." She let him in. They sat at her kitchen table and talked for a long time, not about the campaign or his organization, but about small things. Her mother, his grandmother's better days, the particular weight of caring for people who can't always tell you what they need. He came back the following week, and the week after. He brought food on the nights she worked late. Not from expensive places, but from a small spot nearby that she'd mentioned once in passing that she liked. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He stayed if she wanted company, left if she didn't. Slowly, the visits stopped feeling like obligation and started feeling like something else, something neither of them named yet. Madame Kang asked for Cassie specifically during her calmer mornings. Cassie began visiting the estate on her days off, sitting with her, talking about ordinary things, reading to her sometimes. The episodes were quieter when she was there. Something in Cassie's steadiness registered in Madame Kang at a level that existed beneath language and memory both. Taeyul watched this from across the room one afternoon, Cassie holding his grandmother's hand, neither of them talking, just sitting together in the particular piece of people who don't need to fill silence, and he felt something shift in him that he hadn't expected and couldn't immediately name. One evening in the garden, while Madame Kang dozed inside, Cassie said without looking at him, "You're trying to figure out what I want. Most people want something. Most people do." She looked at him then. "I want your grandmother to have good days. That's what I want when I'm here. And when you're not here?" A small smile. "When I'm not here, I'm somewhere else wanting something else." He laughed. It surprised them both slightly. Another evening he watched her argue gently with one of his household staff about the correct way to make the tea his grandmother preferred, completely unbothered by the fact that she was in the home of one of the most feared men in Seoul, casually insisting that the water temperature mattered. He watched her and thought, she sees nothing here that impresses her. She sees a family. She sees a man carrying something heavy. She sees an old woman who deserves good days. He had spent his whole life being seen as power. Being seen as a man was something different entirely. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Cassie was in the kitchen making tea. Taeyul stood in the main room, not doing anything in particular, and his eye moved along the shelf where some of her things had migrated over the weeks of her visits. A book. A small notebook, and propped against the wall at the far end, a framed photograph she'd brought one afternoon to show Madame Kang a picture of her mother. He didn't mean to look at it closely. He was simply in that part of the room. 2 young women on a balcony, Seoul skyline behind them, 25 years ago, each holding a small child, both smiling the way people smile in photographs they know will last. He looked at the Korean woman on the right. The room stopped making sound. He knew that face. He had known it his entire life. It lived in a locked drawer in Madame Kang's room and in a silver frame on the estate mantel. It was the face he had studied since childhood, trying to construct a memory he was too young to have formed. His mother. His mother was in this photograph. He heard Cassie come in from the kitchen, and he couldn't move yet. Her footsteps slowed when she registered where he was standing and what he was looking at. "That's an old one," she said carefully. "My mom is in it. I brought it for your grandmother." He pointed to the Korean toddler in his mother's arms. He looked at Cassie. She looked at the photo, then at him. "That's you," she said, not a question. "And that?" He pointed to the other toddler, the small black child in the arms of the black woman. Cassie stepped closer, looked at the child, looked at him, looked at the child again. "My mother always talked about her closest friend in Korea," she said, and her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Someone she loved like a sister. She said they lost touch after a tragedy, and she never found her again. She never told me the name. She always just called her her sister in her heart." Taeyul turned to look at her fully. "That woman," he said, "is my mother." The mug slipped from Cassie's hand. It landed on the rug and rolled slowly. Neither of them looked at it. Cassie couldn't breathe. She looked at the photograph again, then at Taeyul. Then back to the photograph. "No," she whispered. Taeyul's eyes remained fixed on the image. "That's impossible." Cassie's voice trembled. "My mother said her friend disappeared after a tragedy. She said she spent years wondering if she was alive." Taeyul finally looked at her. "My grandmother told me my mother had one friend she trusted more than anyone." The room seemed to shrink around them. Cassie's eyes dropped to the two toddlers in the photograph. Two children who had once been held side by side. Two families who had once been inseparable. And suddenly, the question that had been haunting the story from the beginning wasn't why had Madame Kang remembered Cassie's face. It was something much bigger. Why had Madame Kang looked at Cassie that day in the rain, as if, somewhere beneath all the years and all the confusion, she already knew her? Neither of them had an answer. Not yet. But somewhere inside Madame Kang's fading memory, the answer had been waiting for 25 years. If you haven't subscribed yet, right now is the moment. What's coming next will change everything you thought you understood about this story. Don't miss it. Taeyul's older sister flew in from overseas within the week. She walked into the sitting room of the estate, saw Cassie's mother standing near the window, and stopped in the doorway like something had physically halted her. Cassie's mother turned. Both women stood looking at each other across the room, with the doubled sensation of seeing someone you know in a context that shouldn't be possible. "I remember you," Taeyul's sister said. Her voice was not steady. "I was 9 years old. You used to bring fruit in the mornings. You taught me 2 words in English, and I practiced them for weeks." She pressed her hand over her mouth briefly. Then she said, "I took that photograph. I was the one standing on the balcony with the camera. I remember that exact afternoon." Cassie's mother sat down because her legs required it. The story came out in pieces, then in longer sections, then all at once, the way things come out when they have been held back for decades, and finally find a room large enough to exist in. Taeyul's mother had been caught at the center of a syndicate conflict during a period when the Kang organization was fractured and several factions were actively hunting its bloodline. Cassie's mother, her closest friend, her sister in her heart, had hidden her in her home for months without hesitation and without conditions. Taeyul had been born during that time, in a back room of a home that smelled like the particular soap Cassie's mother used. When things stabilized, they had returned to their lives with promises made in complete sincerity. Then grief had come, then relocation, then the specific cruelty of time and distance that breaks even the most genuine connections. Taeyul's mother had died 3 years later. By then, the thread between them had already been lost. 25 years, gone. And then Cassie had knelt down on a wet sidewalk in the rain and changed everything. Madame Kang had been resting in her room during all of this, but sometime during the conversation, she appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, without anyone hearing her come. She moved slowly, with the careful economy of someone navigating a world that sometimes shifted beneath her feet. She stood in the doorway and looked around at the faces in the room. Her gaze moved without hurry, past Taeyul's sister, past Taeyul, past Cassie. Then it landed on Cassie's mother, and something happened behind her eyes that was different from the usual slow clearing. This was not the cautious return from fog. This was a door opening directly, all at once, without warning. She said a name, an old nickname. Cassie's mother made a sound that was not quite a word. Madame Kang walked across the room and took her hands. She looked at her face for a long moment, with eyes that were entirely present, entirely here, entirely clear. Then she turned. She looked at Taeyul. She looked at Cassie. She reached out and took Taeyul's hand, and then very gently, with the deliberateness of someone doing something they have thought about for a long time, she placed it inside Cassie's hand. She closed both of her own hands around them. "Look at you," she said softly. "All grown up. Together again. The full, unguarded smile. The one that only came on her very best days. I knew your hearts would find each other." There was not a dry eye in the room. The kindness given decades ago, in a back room of a safe house, without calculation or expectation, had traveled 25 years through grief and silence and loss, and come back. He brought her back to that street corner on a Friday evening. The pavement was still dark from afternoon rain. The shops were lit. The sidewalk was quiet. He faced her and went down on one knee. "When you stood here," he said, "you didn't know my grandmother's name. You didn't know my family, or my world, or anything about what you were walking into. You saw a woman who was frightened and suffering, and your only thought was that she needed help." He looked up at her. "You saved the woman who raised me before you ever knew who I was, before either of us knew what any of this meant." He opened the box. "I have spent my whole life protecting people out of duty and out of fear. Teach me how to protect someone out of love. Marry me, Cassandra." She was crying before he finished. The kind of crying that happens when something has been held in a very small space for a long time and is finally allowed to take up all the room it needs. "Yes," she said. "Just that." The wedding came in late spring, two cultures woven together with a naturalness that felt less like planning and more like inevitability, like two rivers that had been traveling parallel for years and finally found the place where they were always meant to meet. During the reception, when the music had softened and the light had gone gold, Madame Kang sat near the dance floor in a beautiful ceremonial hanbok, watching Taeyul and Cassie move together with the slightly amazed ease of two people still getting used to being exactly where they are supposed to be. She reached over and took Cassie's mother's hand without looking away from them. "You were my family," she said softly. "And now, my child, your daughter is my family forever." On the floor, Taeyul pulled Cassie closer. "Before you go, please subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave a comment below telling us the biggest lesson this story gave you. We read every single one." Cassie did not help Madame Kang because she knew who she was. She did not help her because she suspected there was something waiting on the other side of that choice. She helped her because she looked at a frightened, shaking, vulnerable human being standing alone in the rain and could not, in the way that some people simply cannot, the way it is written into them below the level of decision, walk past her. That single act of unhesitating compassion exposed a lie that had been built over years. It reunited two women who had loved each other across a 25-year silence. It brought a grandmother back to safety. It untangled a history that grief and distance had knotted shut. It placed two people who had once been held side by side as toddlers by mothers who loved each other back into each other's orbit, this time old enough to know exactly what to do with it. Destiny doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives soaking wet, standing alone on a street corner, reaching out one trembling hand, hoping that someone will stop. Someone did, and nothing, for either of their families, was ever the same again.